The French Connection is a 1971 neo-noir thriller directed by the late William Friedkin, and based on the 1969 book by Robin Moore. And last year, that film became the central movie on the topic of censorship. So first off, if you haven't seen The French Connection, you really should. It's one of the best detective movies ever made. It's gritty, it's amazingly shot, and it has one of the best car chases ever placed on film. But if you haven't seen the film, here's a quick rundown so you'll know what the controversy is all about. The film centers around the New York detectives Popeye Doyle and Cloudy Russo, played by Gene Hackman and Roy Scheider respectively. Their investigation of busting up drug operations was meant to reflect the real-life detectives of Eddie Egan and Sonny Grasso. They track down leads through drug busts and eventually lead up to the French heroin smuggler known as Charnier. Even with Eddie Egan providing insight into the details of drug-busting operations and even having a small role in the film, Friedkin's film is highly critical of Popeye's tactics and his limited worldview. The film often showcases him as a brutal detective who has extra prejudice in his line of work. He shoots suspects in the back, he shoots at FBI agents without much concern, and it's just a generally mean and bigoted person. And despite all of his efforts as a tough cop, Popeye doesn't arrest Charnier in the end. The key smugglers get away, and Popeye is transferred to a different unit for having failed to arrest the suspect. It's a gritty ending that brutally stresses how even cops who break all the rules don't end up solving all their cases. So in June of 2023, The French Connection could be found on Apple TV and the Criterion channel. Unfortunately, the version that aired on these platforms was edited. At about 9 minutes into the movie, Hackman and Scheider have a casual conversation in which racial slurs are used when describing their suspects, and the N-word is one of them. The scene was awkwardly removed, where even if you've never seen the film, the cut is pretty apparent. So let's get the obvious out of the way here. No, The French Connection should not have had that scene edited. I mean, on principle alone, it shouldn't, but to go even further, it's that provocative language that paints the picture. When Popeye casually says the N-word in describing suspects that he doesn't trust, it's meant to sound racist and disgusting. You're not supposed to find his racial views as applaudable because the character is morally adrift in his work. I mean, Friedkin even spells this out in the director's commentary.
And that's really the theme of the film. The thin line between the policeman and the criminal. The cop who has the badge is basically an obsessive, brutalizing racist. And the narcotics smuggler is a gourmet. He dresses well, he loves his wife. He's in every imaginable way a charming human being. And so I was constantly throughout the film trying to play that contrast and the thin line between them, which very often crossed over.
And although Popeye's racism can be spotted in other forms throughout the film, his early usage of racial slurs is the easiest of moments to read this part of his persona. Removing this bit of dialogue removes more than just a bad word. It removes a part of his character, and kind of a crucial part of his character at that. It should also be stated that this edit doesn't seem to be the work of either Apple TV or the Criterion channel. I mean, Criterion has always been about presenting films in a manner that respects the wishes of the directors, so it'd be incredibly out of character for them to censor this movie. The edits came from the film's distributor of 20th Century Studios and their owners of Disney, for whatever reason they wanted to soften the film's language. This staging of the edited version of The French Connection feels closer to what it was like watching R-rated films on basic cable. To meet the FCC standards of cable, many films that contain nudity, sex, violence, and profanity had these elements either sanitized or removed from their TV broadcasts, and in the most awkward of ways. Take RoboCop, for example. In this edited version, there are a host of changes. The brief nudity of breasts in this scene is covered with a painted bra. The iconic scene of a mutated henchman being smashed into slush is changed so that the car avoids him instead. And as for the profanity, well...
You finished fooling around with your suspect.
It's a better plan. Forget Jones. I'd go straight to the old man if I could.
Jones is gonna come looking for you.
Forget Jones.
He fumbled the ball and I was there to pick it up.
It's as good as Mark, you dipstick, you stupid. Shut your face up and do it.
You are gonna be a bad mother crusher.
Your tail is mine. I really love that guy.
Iron butt, bonehead. Once I even called him Airhead.
Fiend on the wrong guy. You're out of your mind. Ladies, leave. Oh, damn you! Get lost. Your company built a freaky thing. Now I gotta deal with it? I don't have time for this baloney.
So yeah, this was the case for nearly every R-rated film that you'd see on cable or network television. So instead of having Walter's hilarious profanity-laced rant at a kid from The Big Lebowski, you'd hear this instead.
You see what happens, Larry? You see what happens when you find a stranger in the Alps? This is what happens. This is what happens when you feed us scrambled eggs.
These were the limitations of basic cable. If you wanted to watch the film uncut, you'd either have to watch it on a premium cable channel like HBO or Cinemax, or, you just have to find it on home video. And we're seeing the same effect happen with streaming channels. Because, let's face it, streaming is the new cable. This is not a new idea. It's what everybody watches, and the studios know that. Not only do they know that, but they can take greater ownership of their media within this environment. Disney no longer has to strike a deal with Netflix. They could just make Disney Plus and stream all their TV shows and movies on their own. And there's a sort of Pandora's box that opened with this. Because on one level, sure, studios streaming their own libraries don't have to be beholden to the same FCC regulations. And they don't have to appeal as much to advertisers if they don't want to. On another level, however, they can twist their own platforms to suit the brand they've established for themselves. Disney Plus, for example, streams the old Muppet TV show, but had decided not to include the episode with special guest star Chris Langham. The choice had to do with how Langham was found guilty of being in possession of child in 2007. So, yeah, probably not a good look if you're trying to push an app where you can watch Muppets with the kids. Studios can also decide to cancel any show or remove any movie they want at any time. They don't have to go by Nielsen ratings or advertisers being attached. They can simply just take off any show or movie if they don't want to pay royalties anymore. So even though distribution and access models have changed, we're basically back to the same way it was with cable, albeit with an even worse residual model. If a film is on a streaming service, it might end up as diced up as it was on cable. And the reasons to even watch it would be the same as cable. Like, it's not a good cut, but you're watching it out of convenience and budget more than anything else. And just like those times of cable and edited for television movies, if you want to see a film in its unaltered form, free from the edits demanded of standards and advertisers and streaming service providers, you would have to get that movie on home video. Because the moment that news dropped about how The French Connection was edited on streaming platforms, every collector scrambled to find the Blu-ray, specifically the 2012 Signature Series Blu-ray by Fox. And I'd highly recommend buying the film, especially for the commentary track by Friedkin, which is just so good. But if you haven't bought the film yet, relax, it's not going out of print. Well, not yet, anyway. The major surge in sales probably ensures that 20th Century won't be holding back on printing more copies of the Blu-ray. But physical media holds more importance beyond just having a film in its intended form or having access to a director's commentary track. In several cases, it's the only way you can watch a film. Take, for example, the films of Pier Paolo Pasolini. Pasolini's films are incredibly erotic, they're very violent, and they're highly provocative. And you can find a few of them on streaming, like The Canterbury Tale and Arabian Nights. But then there's Salo, or The 120 Days of Sodom. This is easily Pasolini's most brutal, horrifying, graphic, and quintessential film of his filmography, and it cannot be watched anywhere online. As of this recording, there is no place online where you can either stream, rent, or digitally purchase Salo. So if you ever want to be in on the jokes that everybody keeps making about this film,
this is a great date movie. My favorite part of this movie is when and then the guy, he goes into a room and he finds this plate of
You're gonna have to watch it on DVD or Blu-ray to experience all of its inhuman allure about fascist Italy using young people as playthings. And word of warning though, it's very extreme. Like, I'm trying to imagine how a streaming service would even edit that film the same way that they edited The French Connection. Like, it seems impossible to me. I mean, like, you could censor the movie, but you'd probably make the film about half the length and the entire point of the film would be obscured. Physical media is the last bastion of watching films unedited. It also seems to be the only platform that respects the will of the directors. But the sad truth is that today's studios are less likely to give a film a home video release, choosing instead to keep them reserved for their streaming platforms exclusively. One of the best horror films released by 20th Century Studios in 2022 was Barbarian. I loved this movie, and it was in theaters, and it somehow, as of this video, still doesn't have a Blu-ray release. And oh sure, Barbarian is still streaming, it's still streaming on some platforms, but only for so long as those services want to keep it around and pay for the royalties. Markets for physical media are also growing smaller by the day. Best Buy dropped their video section entirely in 2024. Target has reduced their video section, and it's gonna be all gone by 2025. We still have Barnes & Nobles though, and they do still have their annual sales of Criterion and Arrow DVDs and Blu-rays. There's also Walmart, but I really don't want that to be the last resort. Their stores are just not good. Like, I've seen their video sections, and they do have a solid selection and even a few exclusive covers that look pretty neat, but it's Walmart. Anyway, the point I'm making here is that movies are not safe from being censored on streaming apps. The French Connection appeared edited on the Criterion channel because that's the version that Disney gave them. And if that's not an endorsement for Criterion to better preserve the film with a Criterion Collection physical release, then I don't know what is. So it seems like we're kinda back to the days of cable, where your favorite movie might be appearing on a streaming service, but it might also be in an edited format. I'm still a bit hopeful for physical media though. The Criterion Collection and Arrow still has its devoted fan base. Physical releases for Barbie, Oppenheimer, and even the Venture Brothers direct-to-video movie have been topping the sales charts in a huge way. I'm so glad that all these films had physical releases, especially since the video-on-demand version of the Venture Brothers movie that most people bought before the Blu-ray came out turned out to be the edited for television version. Like, why? Why would you do this, Warner Brothers? Like, I guess it's a good way to get people to buy the Blu-ray, but still, why did the video-on-demand version have to be edited? Why can't I get an uncensored view of Dr. Venture's dick? But that just goes back to my point about the need for physical media to preserve the versions meant to be seen. I'm happy that Oppenheimer's on Blu-ray the way it was screened in theaters, on the off chance that some prudes want the sex scenes edited out of the streaming versions, because preservation is the key factor in all of this. I don't mind so much if studios want to tinker with their films and craft different versions, so long as the originals are still preserved. I didn't mind that there was an alternative soundtrack version of Fritz Lang's Metropolis, because I still have the original film preserved. I didn't mind that Mamoru Oshii decided to create a new version of Ghost in the Shell with a different color palette and updated CGI, because I still had the original film to go back to. But with streaming apps, no original version has to remain in place. The studios running their streaming apps don't have to put a label on their edited movies where it's specified that this version of the French Connection you're watching is edited. They can just call it the French Connection with no additional labeling, and audiences will believe that censored version is the true version. So if you're gonna watch a quality film like the French Connection, watch it at its best on Blu-ray. And seriously, just listen to Friedkin's audio commentary, it's so good.